All right, thank you, folks. We are here today for the second installment of the Product Movie Club. The video that we watched this week was called Product is Still Hard by Christian Idiodi, I think is how you pronounce his last name. Works with the Silicon Valley Product Group from Marty Kagan fame. He's I think the founder of that group. And the main aspects of the talk I added to the agenda, just kind of the outline of the talk itself. But the main purpose of the talk is just, product is still hard. Marty Kagan had a talk, I think 10 years ago, called Product is Hard. And this is kind of the continuation of it, that there's still a lot of challenges with this job, with this role, and ways that we can kind of overcome those together, areas that things that we, important to focus on, and things that are just kind of part of the gig that we have to deal with. And I thought it would be a good one to watch and talk about, and see how we can apply some of the thoughts here, talk about if there are any challenges here at GitLab related to these things, and just see where the conversation goes. So there's a discussion section. Please add things. I added a few kind of seeds in there to get the convo going. And mostly around the first section around process. And the first one I'd say that I think is important to remember with Agile, especially, doing Agile versus being Agile, I thought was interesting, because I think a lot of places consider just the ceremonies and doing sprints being Agile, but actually being Agile is more about being able to respond to changing requirements and outcomes over the output, and people and conversations over process and tools, and those aspects I think are easy to lose sight of. And so, just around changing requirements are encouraged. I think that's one that there's mixed reactions to in general in product and from engineering side. So I was wondering if we could start the conversation around, what's just your experience been with changing requirements and being able to respond to new learnings, and how is that going in GitLab? And
I'll start.
Okay. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I think GitLab encourages the sort of ship small and ship fast enough so that you can go do something else. I think if you need to, or if the market changes, or if it doesn't respond to what you're doing, I think we have a mostly supportive culture of that in general. I think sometimes the goalposts move around a lot, and I think there's some amount of that that's chaos, but I think that's generally encouraged here, and it feels like we are flexible in what we want to go do. I think that can lead to some down cycles and maybe some lost time, but I think to cycles where we are working are maybe more thoughtful. But
yeah, I think that's a great point. I think that's, one of the reasons for iteration and MVC is to allow yourself to make those adjustments and those changes, and not get locked into a kind of waterfall-ish project that you end up, 3/4 of the way through and realize it's not ultimately what you need. And I definitely can relate to the requirements changing and that feeling disruptive, but I still feel like it's better to change to the, what we know today versus just sticking with the plan we made 2 weeks ago, even if it is disruptive. And that's something I think that as product people, we have to kind of reinforce with our teams at times, because it is, from an engineering perspective, annoying, and it's challenging, especially if they're halfway through something. But at the end of the day, we're here to drive the correct outcomes for the business, and if that means we have to make an adjustment, then that's what it means. Anyone want to add anything to that, Kevin or Amanda?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think for the majority of the work that we are doing, we shouldn't be looking so far ahead, and we should be, really focused on that smallest piece that we could deliver, so we could get the feedback, so we could then deliver the next piece, so that you never get into this I'm building, the long-term vision thing. But there are times, of course, where we have to think about it as a holistic package, and when change occurs there, it's disruptive, and that's tough. I think it's the nature of the beast in some cases, and you have to be able to roll with it. I think there are things you can do ahead of time to ward it off a little bit. You know, being able to really ask the good questions, understand the user's point of view and their perspective and how this is going to help or hurt their workflow, so that you can head it off. But yeah, I think everybody touched on the big points there.
I have a follow-up question, which is, how do you know that your late breaking change is the right change to make at that specific point in time? What are tools y'all use to enable you to feel confident that whether the changes you're bringing or someone else is bringing, it's the right thing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kevin. I don't know if there's a cut and dry answer that fits every situation. My experience with this oftentimes is there's a realization either from an area of the business or a process thing that was not known initially. And so it's usually pretty clear, like, oh, this isn't going to work, or, oh, we should probably look for an alternative here because this is going to be painful for whoever. When it's a little more subjective, that's where it gets tough. And that's where I think at times it's maybe better to stick with the plan you had and get it out and get feedback and allow yourself to iterate down the line. If it's an opinion from, like, we did 6 user tests and it's 3 and 3 down the middle. Like, I don't know if you really want to change your plan for that. But if it's, hey, there's this technical challenge that makes this approach take 6 months longer than we had thought, then I think that's pretty clear. I don't know how have others experienced this?
I just circled to the video. One thing I really liked that he highlighted that I don't always do myself, and I will start doing, is I'm looking at my notes, is making sure that your focus is clear, and the focus being what are the major few points of leverage for the business that you're trying to achieve with this thing. And so when that conflict comes up, like if it's a gap that you just didn't identify in the beginning and all of a sudden it's a thing, that's one thing. But when it comes to conflict, that, oh no, we thought we're going to do it this way, and now they're saying it should be this way. I think bringing it back to what are we trying to achieve and what was the strategy to begin with? And does it still check the box? Yes. Okay. Then it's a little bit easier to make the decision. Does it make sense to move in that direction? Because you might be able to eliminate it just off the basis of, well, that wasn't really in the scope of what we were trying to achieve. That's a whole nother thing that is a good thing to address, but not what we were trying, the output we were trying to get here. So I think that's also a good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. Always take it back to those first principles and goals. There's lots of ways to solve them and achieve those goals, but if we don't know what those goals are, then it's very difficult to come up with that right solution.
I have another follow-up question, which is, when it's easy to get product managers to voice concerns and input that facilitates some sort of change, I often find it's a lot more difficult to bring these thoughts out of, say, engineering or design or any other stakeholder that's part of this process. What have your experience been?
I will say I find maybe the opposite at GitLab, and maybe that's like the stage that I work in, and it might vary stage to stage, right? I think particularly being in Create, you actually are like sort of the core of the thing that the engineers interact with all of the time. They care a lot about what goes on in Create and what those experiences are like, because you are directly impacting not only what they're building or what they're doing, but also like their actual workflows. Every time you roll out a new feature, or you say you want to go do something else, or you're like trying to design an experience, these are actually the engineers that use that experience. And so my engineers in particular are very opinionated, and they also come, and not from like I'm an engineer and this is what I want to do, but they're very good about like stepping back and thinking about how they respond as a user and how would they feel as a user, and making sure that like they push back in the right ways that like I will then respond to them. They're not just sort of like dissenting. We have a relationship where they understand like the things that I want them to push back on in a way to do that. But I found that they're incredibly thoughtful about it, just because I think of where we work versus, and I don't know that this is true, but in like another stage, like if you were in planning and issues, right? Like they might not have as strong a feeling about things on issues because they don't necessarily like comment and deal in issues and work that way all the time, but they very much work in like these other spaces. And so I've been fortunate, and it's one of the things that a year ago when we were interviewing like crazy, it was bananas, and I talked to like a million product managers all the time. They're like, what's your favorite thing? And I was like, oh, it's the engineers. Like they actually care about everything we're doing and like push back in the right way. And it's one of the like the best things you can have in terms of product, at least for me.
Yeah, that's really cool that you have your customers literally working for you at the same time and having input on it. So, but I think the key there, Kevin, back to your point, is I think in Kai's situation, he has people that are engaged and have empathy for the user because they are that user. So I would say if you're having trouble, get your engineers, get your designers more involved in the discovery process and getting close to the customer so that they can have that empathy and kind of put themselves in the customer's shoes. And I think you'll start to get that engagement and feedback naturally through that. I also have, I'd say, a team that is passionate and engaged, and they often give me feedback on how they think we should approach things. So I'm lucky in that regards as well. But I would say, as much as you can do to drive the team to get closer to the customer and to the user and have that empathy for them, I think those other things will come naturally.
I do a lot of videos of what it looks like from a customer perspective, because a lot of things is still theory to our engineers. So because they don't work in the code they're coding. So I'll go in as a user and show them the roadblock, and give them the video, and they say that helps.
That's a great tactic. Something I've used in the past too is playing actual calls from customers. Like you can hear the aggravation and the pain and in their voice. I know we don't do that as much, but we can find stuff more easily, I'd say, with Chorus than I could in the past in other places. So that may be another technique, is have a session where like, here's 15 calls, or here's 3 calls on this area we're looking to address. Hear the pain in their voice, understand this issue and why it's a priority for us to solve.
Thanks, all. These are awesome.
Cool. So we kind of touched a lot on process, but I think we can skip these things. We kind of just touched on discovery, actually. I think one of the big points is getting the whole team involved in discovery if you can. It's not always easy here, but I think the goal of that is to drive that empathy and that understanding with the customer and their pain point. I do want to jump probably to 4, Kevin, if you want to.
On the discovery point, I do want to say, like, I think discovery was sort of different than like the last one we were talking about. Maybe I think when it gets to engineering, which is sort of the like toss it over the wall that he talks about, which is less of the like collaboration and more about handoffs, it sort of seems like that's when their feedback starts. I think as GitLab, like a year and a half ago, one of the things that like stood out to me when I joined GitLab was planning used to be like much more inside of the milestone. Like you used to have an issue that sort of had a loose idea of what you were going to go do, and like product and design and engineering were like sort of building and like solutioning all at the same time, like through the end of the milestone. And that was really collaborative. And now I think it feels a little more like agile fall, where like we sort of like are trying to be ahead and like we get engineering and design handoff like input, but it feels very like process driven, which is probably the point forward. It does feel a little more like that, and it's less like in the heat of the moment, like everyone sort of mobbing over an issue and like getting to the solution. And there's pros and cons to both. I think but it does feel like discovery, at least in my experience, is not whole team. And I think part of that is like it's so hard to get engineers to take time away from what they're doing. Like I have maintainers, got multiple front-end maintainers in my group, and like back-end engineers who are, you know, near senior staff level. And so they are consistently doing abnormal amount of review work. And like, they don't have time to also do these other things and ship features that we need them to ship. And so like, it feels like a lot of that is harder than it used to be as the organization has maybe gotten larger, just because there is so much more overhead and process there.
Yeah, it's like the constant challenge I've had in this situation is the the engineering managers and directors don't want the engineers doing things other than developing for the most part. I've had this everywhere I've worked and trying to get this going. And so I don't know. I think the key is to try to figure out to the outcome being empathy and understanding of the problem and the research if you can. So are there ways that they don't necessarily need to be directly involved in it, but that you can summarize it in a easy to consume fashion so that you can get that result that you want without them needing to sit through, 5 hours of user calls or things like that. And it's always a challenge, I'd say, is to find that right balance of how much to involve them and how much to expect of them while still trying to get to a point where you have that understanding. I don't know if I mean, I think Amanda touched on videos, there's phone calls. Are there other techniques that you all have used to try to get that information back to your larger teams so that they can understand, why we're doing what we're doing?
We try and do like I have a weekly meeting with my team, which is very typically tactical, like issues that are merge requests that are top of mind based on like what's going on and what we're trying to deliver. But our group also does one of those weeklies we turn into like a monthly, and we've gone back and forth. We did it when I started, we didn't for a period, and we're sort of doing it again. And those tend to be where I try and like bring those like, hey, here's the changes to the direction page that we've been making, and here's sort of like the insights that we have from other things. I also try and share a lot of like tweets and other stuff that like our social media team is doing, like in the editor group when they're specific to that. That way they know that like, one, they're having an impact, but two, like here's the things that I am reading and like ingesting. And like, I know you can't read and ingest all of the content that like we are on a regular basis, but I try and at least make sure that like some of that's available. So that way when we do shift or when we go and build the next thing, they sort of loosely could have connected a bunch of dots if they were, sort of paying attention to what was going on. It's not, I don't think it's a perfect system, but I try to make sure that like as much of that is available to them as possible.
Yeah, it's a great technique.
Self-serve, but it's tough.
One example in the configure team that I've been seeing is the challenge is we're dealing with new tech in a very technical space. So engineers in general are the best position to understand all the ins and outs. And this is not in line with developers should just focus on development. One thing that has been helpful for our group is the CNCF has like a lot of stuff, a lot of resources. And for Kubernetes development, they have all these like SIGs and interest groups that relate directly to our categories. So if engineers want to be like get really deep on the technology or ideas, like one great forum to glean those ideas and whatever it is to just be in those Slack groups that's published. But again, like to your point, Mike, like that needs to be balanced with their day job, and not everyone has the capacity to be in a bunch of different places at the same time. But it is a great forum to look outside of GitLab to people who are doing similar things. To build up that empathy.
Yeah, definitely. I guess kind of depending on the stage you operate in, you may have an easier time than not. Like for Kai, I think it's easy for them to have empathy for the users because they are them. And same thing with you, Kevin, which is it's a pretty cool place to be in. I've never actually worked on a tool that I had that. I've had internal stakeholders that were my customers, but that's different. They're usually just want more faster. Cool.
Yeah.
So we're almost at time. Oh, Kai,
I was just gonna say, one of the things in line with what Kevin just said was I was actually just prior to this on a call with my engineering manager for our backend team, and he was asking like, well, what are we doing in 13.6? Because we sort of come off like a couple big work streams that we've been going over, and we've got some tech that we need to clean up. He's like, what else? And I was like, I don't actually have anything like solid for you right now, which is like not great because like a lot of our stuff is now in Vue and React, and like it's all JavaScript based, and our front-end engineers do a lot at some point. But I was like, here's this like thing for learning and development that I'm thinking about, and I'm willing to like sort of seed like part of this milestone for you guys to go and look at this, that I think will be beneficial down the road, because there's this other stuff that we're thinking about and want to go do, and this is a down cycle for us, and so like we're going to take that opportunity to go play with new technology and go learn some other stuff that like in a normal milestone, most engineers don't get the luxury to like sort of be seeded the time back to go and do that. So if that happens for groups, which I think is rare, but if it does happen for your group, it's another option.
Well, I think that's really, it's smart. And I think it's a hard thing to, as a product person, to admit, like, I don't actually have a ton of work ready for you, but instead of trying to get caught into this feature factory, it's all about the output, not the outcome. You're taking a step back and giving them some time to allow you to figure out the right outcome and how to get to it, versus just keep the team fed and keep the factory pumping out the issues, which I don't know if you were in the book club that Jeremy was running. So maybe 6 months ago, maybe 9 months ago now, the Melissa Perry book around the build trap, which is all about that. Like, it's okay to just pause work for a week if you need to. Like, it's better to do that and figure out the right thing to do than just keep the team chewing through features and adding more debt. So I think that's cool that you're able to do that and not and say that on this call with Scott on here and not feel like he's going to come down on you.
Be clear, they're doing other things, Scott, that are valuable.
Get back to work, Kai.
Awesome. So I think we're at time. But before we close out, was there anything else that you all wanted to raise as a big takeaway from the video, or something that made you think twice about how we're doing things?
Well, I would just say I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks to the four of you for preparing and having a great discussion. Now that we have the bi-weekly office hours, maybe you could work with Jeremy and Anut to tee future ones of these up as a topic, because this was a great discussion. I wish all 40 PMs had seen, could benefit from it. So that might be an easy way to just grab on a train, and you've got your audience built in, Mike. So
yeah, that's a great idea, Scott. Yeah, thank you.
Mike, there was one topic that I would love to kick around, not now because there's not enough time, but maybe we could do it for office hours. And that was his idea of roadmaps being bad and moving to a transitional roadmap. I understand why roadmaps are bad. You taught me that. You said the minute you publish it, it's out of date, right? And you're always chasing and changing it. But what is the functional or the transitional roadmap, so that I can commit to Scott that, in Q4, I am going to deliver these things and I have, this focus, but also not create this burden of a roadmap that is inflexible and not in line with, what we should be doing. So maybe that might be a good topic for office hours.
I think that'd be a great topic. Yeah, okay. It's a very tricky. I mean, if you have a few minutes, I can give my take on it real quick. I think it's important to have the next quarter or so a good idea of what that is, and pretty detailed out, not to capacity, like plan each milestone to 60%, the big things you want, allow room for flexibility, because new requests will come up, bugs will come up, surprises will come up. So never really plan to more than 60%, I'd say, in your roadmap. And then for the next, after 3 months, is just like thematic problem areas to solve. Not necessarily how you're going to solve it, but these are the problem areas that we want to get into. And that's what feeds your discovery efforts. And then, you kind of have this rolling where the next few months are pretty tight. And then beyond that, you just have, these are focus areas and themes that we want to get into. So start to give me your feedback, stakeholders, internal folks, start to help me get a better understanding of the true problems and get that discovery motion kind of going forward, because you're going to need to prioritize those problems in there as you get into that discovery phase too. So that's the way that I've seen the best balance. Like, I don't think you can realistically have an org our size with no, ability to set expectations or give ideas on when things are coming. There's just too many moving pieces. You've got to have a pretty good idea of the next 2-3 milestones, I think. I don't know, Scott, if that makes sense, or if I just said something I shouldn't have. But.
No. Plus one, I feel the same way. You should know what you're doing for the next quarter, and after that, it's thematic to drive the research you're doing.
Thank you.
Cool. But yeah, we should add that to the office hours, because I don't know how many people are actually doing like roadmaps and publishing them out. I think the direction pages are more what we use for that.
Yeah.
But it's a topic that I'm sure we could get a lot of debate on.
Thanks
Awesome.
for organizing this, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
No problem.
Great.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Great weekend, y'all. Bye.
Bye-bye.